Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Safe Ed for All show on Socialist Telly, episode 8. And with students by and large fully returned to schools across the UK now, we're taking a look at some of the mitigations or alleged mitigations that have been put into place. You might think we'll struggle to fill an hour if that's all we'll be talking about, what mitigations there are. We keep thinking, well, hang on a minute, they haven't done any, have they? But, well, we'll answer those questions during the course of this show. From Safe Ed, we have Sarah Saul flying solo tonight, and our guest tonight returning once more is Andrew Hobbs, our ventilation and air quality solution provider. Welcome to the both of you. How are you?
Hello. Fine.
I'm good, thank you, Damien. Nice to see you both again. Very good to be here. Hope you guys are enjoying the weather. The last of the weather probably for a few months now.
Oh, is that the end of summer officially?
Well, let's not speak too soon. Hopefully not. But it's been really nice couple of days, hasn't it? Nice and warm.
It's been horrible, miserable, and foggy in Cornwall.
Oh, you can't have everything. You say you live in the best part of the world. You can't have the weather as well all the time,
No, yeah, why not? Now, anyway, as always, we start off the show with the latest news and updates, not necessarily on the weather, but on the work and campaigning Safe Ed for All have been involved in the last week. So what is the latest update you have for us tonight, please, Sarah?
Okay, just a few, not so many. So we haven't got our other founding member, Lisa. We obviously, as you've mentioned, we probably just can't afford her anymore. She's far too famous for us right now. She's a bit busy right now, but she's had some great news this week. So her eldest child has been supported by his secondary school, Shevington High, I think it is. But if I've got that wrong, Lisa will go mad. So I'm sure Lisa can tell us exactly which school it is. He's been supported to remote learn at the minute, indefinitely. He logged on. She even put a picture of him in his uniform, logged on for his first day of secondary school, because that's the safest place for her family and with the condition she has for her son to be remote educating unless mitigations are put in place. Unfortunately, she's also received from her daughter's school, is a primary school, refusal for her to have any remote learning support and notification that the fining process will begin again. That I think was put on hold last year for many parents, even if they've had the penalty notice, but it's starting again. Hi, I think it's just arrived. And then we've got a very bad case at the minute. Emmy, who those of you who watched the Safe Ed show before know, is in Northern Ireland, is also heading up Shielders at the minute. She's just had it confirmed that both her sons are expected back in school. Nothing's changed with Emmy's underlying conditions or her children's. However, there is no authorization code anymore. They will not be allowed to remote educate. Now, what some people don't know, and it's different in different regions of Northern Ireland apparently, but generally Northern Ireland treats absence from school very differently from here. It's not generally a fining process in the court. It's straight away a Section 47 child safeguarding issue, and you are prosecuted for child abuse for not sending your child to school. So this is a very serious matter, which I'm sure Emmy can come and update people, but we've been trying to raise awareness of this. We've had quite a lot of press interest at the minute, but this really needs to be covered. At the end of the day, education and health may be different in the devolved nations. However, how can that be acceptable in a pandemic? Parents who are keeping their children remote educating, they're asking for very little support from any schools because the school isn't a safe environment. You can't guarantee that their children aren't being unnecessarily and knowingly exposed to an increased risk of infection. I've seen the rates currently in Northern Ireland. I haven't got them on me right now, but they're sky high in the under 16s. So the best place and the safest place for her family is for her children to be remote educated, yet this is not going well at the minute. So there's that. Some good news, I suppose. I took part in a Zero COVID Now seminar on Tuesday, I think it was. I'm all confused what day it is. And the speakers were Diane Abbott, Belle Ribeiro, Adi, and Claudia Webb. And then Vicky Blake from the UCU, Emmy from Shielders, and myself from Safe Ed, and Deepti Gursani. Basically, the topic was, we can't learn to live with the virus, and that we should stop this strategy of vaccinating and infecting and turn to the vaccinating and mitigation strategy, which suppresses and keeps the infection rates low. So we can all then live with the virus circulating, but there'll be such small numbers, nobody's going to be placed at this increased risk that we all are at the minute. So that, and I think some figures that were quite surprising that came out of that, I think Diane Abbott presented the findings that on the 2nd of September 2020, there were 828 hospitalizations with COVID. On the 2nd of September 2021, there were 7,500 hospitalizations with COVID. So you can see we are not in a much better position than we were last year. And to take away, you know, from my point of view and everything we're doing at Safe Ed, to take away any of the very few mitigations we've had at school previously, and to actually instigate worse measures, you know, this idea that my children, if I'm positive and one of my children is positive, the other is expected to attend school unless he shows symptoms and then gets a PCR. This just seems madness to me. But and there's also an article out today that Ofsted are looking into off-rolling, and off-rolling are just their definition. They define off-rolling as the practice of removing a pupil from the school roll without a formal permanent exclusion, or by encouraging a parent to remove their child from the school roll when the removal is primarily in the interest of the school rather than in the best interest of the children. Now, knowing that there were 40,000 plus deregistrations last year, how many of those were coerced deregistrations? How many of those would be classed by Ofsted as off-rolling? So school leaders, if you have encouraged any parent to avoid fines by taking their children off roll and doing electrical education, Ofsted are now, well, decided that they are going to take serious notice of this. So it's going to affect your Ofsted report. That's about it, I think, for this week so far.
Yeah, the Ofsted thing's rather intriguing, that they're actually going to start investigating instances of forced off-rolling. This isn't something that we've actually touched on previously. We've spoken a lot of parents voluntarily choosing to because they're at wits end, and of course the school is happy for them to do that. It's off their case. The government have got little argument about it. It's off their case as well. It's effectively a lot of people wiping their hands of things. How big an issue has forced off-rolling been?
From the parents that we're in touch with, quite a lot, and luckily what is going to help, because they can all report straight away to Ofsted, is if they've got it in writing. So if they've had a school leadership team member has actually emailed them and said, yes, unfortunately my hands are tied, you are going to be fined, which is not true. They always have discretion, let's always remember that. But of course you could deregister and that would stop the fining process. If they have that in writing, that will really help with the legal case that the Good Law Project is pushing forward as well, because now that Ofsted have said they're going to be looking into this further, they take this very seriously. I think some school leaders who have done this are going to have a bit of a wake-up call. And as I always say, we're not painting every school leadership team with the same brush. We know there are some extremely very good school leaders out there, and some people have been put in impossible situations, but those that have been child-centered in their approach and have tried to do what they can to help families, particularly those vulnerable families who have underlying conditions. So that's not all the case, you know, every child and every person involved with the school, people who work there, should be entitled to a safe environment to work and attend. But anyway, those school leaders, there are some that have been very good. We highlight those constantly with Safe Ed because, you know, there should be praise where praise is due. But those that haven't been so great, there's just another little warning for you. Apart from the risk assessments that can be challenged if they're not adequate, there's also Ofsted now
Yeah, it's reassuring that there are school leaders out there that are doing the right thing by families, by students, from a health perspective, and not just clinging to every word coming out of the Department for Education, as ridiculous as that so often is. And the COVID figures that we're looking at this year, as opposed to last year, as you mentioned, Diane Abbott mentioning those figures, they are so much worse now. And of course, these mitigations have been taken down. I was just having a look at the latest summary today, and we're up to almost 1,000 deaths within the last week now. Another 863 patients admitted to hospital. 38,000 new positive cases. It's just on the rise everywhere.
That's my strong point. However, what is the difference between 828 on the same day last year and 7,500 this year? Anybody?
It's crazy, isn't it? It's absolutely ludicrous. And yet the mitigations are less now. There's fewer of them now than there was then. What is, and we have a more virulent, more infectious strain that's dominant these days. It's crackers. Just one final point I just wanted to make was just to say congratulations to Lisa for getting a bit of good news, finally a bit of light at the end of her tunnel, because she's had a torrid time with her children and their school. But Emmy in Northern Ireland, I found this out the other day actually, that that all mitigations, all shielding that she'd had been wiped out, and it's such a hardline stance in Northern Ireland. Yes, it's a devolved issue, but it's literally straight to social services almost.
Can I just say, I know of a case. Yeah, I know of a specific case, and the parents, once they're involved in, once Section 47 has been issued, they can't talk about it. So I can't name them, or they can't speak up about it. However, you know, it's a child abuse case, and in this case, a parent, the mother was vulnerable. I won't go into, she'd had some health issues previously, which had then left her immunocompromised. The two children, they refused to send their children to school. This had gone on for some time. And then what happened was the school leader, a social worker, and the police turned up on their doorstep with uniform for the children, and they were told their children would be attending school today or the father would be arrested. Wow. What do you do in that situation? They've never been in trouble with the police before. They've never had a truancy officer or any of these issues prior to the pandemic. That family now are facing prosecution under child abuse laws.
Yeah. Because
the prosecution is still going ahead because they have been absent for so long. Their children have now been forced back into an unsafe environment, placing all of them at risk of infection, but the mother potentially at risk of hospitalisation and death. And none of that matters because it's all about attendance.
And as you say, the caseload in Northern Ireland, although I haven't got the figures to hand myself either, the children there have been at school for about 2 weeks longer than they have in England and Wales. So it's that much further along. It's a similar picture to what we've seen in Scotland, which has been far more widely broadcast, at the COVID spikes that are happening there. But the rest of the country will sadly soon catch up, almost inevitably.
Yep.
Andrew, you wanted to come in and make a point then, sir?
Yes, well, I concur absolutely. I mean, you know, the daily rates are not dropping. You know, it's going to rise. It's going to increase, like we've been saying. And yeah, the fact that we just don't have the mitigations that even the mitigations last year were better than having none at all. I think I said before that in my mind, it's kind of like a gamble, you know, that you have the vaccination strategy rollout. That's a great thing, but there is the issue of transmission. You know, people like us have always argued that, and you really must have a control of transmission. I think that there's a sense that, oh, it doesn't matter because, you know, that'll look after itself. And the fact that every single time we come away from lockdown, the lockdown strategy of physically distancing people, you know, has effect. We see that, but the moment that it's relaxed, it starts to rise again because none of the mitigations that we have are killing the virus at source, like we've said before. You know, so. I mean, the mitigations that we have in place, you know, increasing ventilation, air change rates, using filtration, UV, all of these things have some benefit, but in the context of trying to stop transmission of a live virus that can make you unhealthy and kill you very quickly, none of those mitigations are killing it at the moment it's released. And the best possible process is something that does, you know. So, you know, we are, you know, it's the fact that as you just said there, Damien, you know, what's going on in Scotland, cases are increasing, and we're looking down the barrel in England right now, you know. So it's not looking good.
No. Asit Mishra, are you there, sir? Have you've managed to join us?
Yeah, sorry guys, I ran a bit late. I wasn't paying attention to
not a problem, sir. You are an internal climate researcher, according to your Twitter profile. So I wonder if I might come to you next of all. The UK government have done away with most of the mitigations we've become used to, as we've spoken on already. No masks, no social distancing, no bubbles, no contact tracing, and have returned to an emphasis on personal hygiene and hand washing to limit the spread of a virus we know to be airborne. The indoor climate in schools doesn't seem that great right now in that context. The focus isn't on the air in regards to this virus anymore, is it?
No, it seems there. Okay, I mean, there has been a history of ignoring the indoor air. It may be because it's something invisible, you don't realize it. But if you just spend a moment trying to think about it, your lungs have 3,000 times the area of your hands. So every minute or every second of your life, there are 3,000 pairs of hands touching the air all over the space. And if that air is not of good quality, you can imagine what's going to happen. If we are so focused on hand hygiene, we should be 3,000 times more focused on air hygiene, maybe. Schools, unfortunately, historically have had bad air quality. It's related to design. It's also related to financial concerns. And that has come back to sort of haunt us at this moment. And typically you have different sort of pollutants, like let's say particulate matter, volatile organic compounds. Unfortunately, right now we have a pollutant which is life-threatening. I mean, acutely life-threatening. The others are also, but this is something that can be life-threatening within a matter of hours. And I mean, at this moment, without a focus on trying to make sure that people are not inhaling something that could possibly kill them or cause long-term damage to health, trying to focus more emphasis on hygiene, hand hygiene, or trying to entirely do away with such precautions like masking and distancing, and even contact tracing. This seems quite counterintuitive. I'm trying to be polite.
Yeah, just being polite is one thing. It seems to me that this government is intentionally trying to get our children infected. If that is what they're trying to do, then this is exactly the way to go, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, typically I'd never think of comments as being very efficient. So maybe that's not intentional, but they are pretty much stumbling into that area where children are going to get infected. And I mean, it's not my area of specialization, but from what I've heard from people who deal with, let's say, children getting infected with these viruses, it doesn't seem to be that children are any less prone to getting infected. If we are going to subject them to a poorly ventilated space, a space with poor air hygiene, it's almost certain that they will be infected. There's no, I mean, way out of that.
Yeah, and I think I was going to say, I think that's it. What I've noticed, you did a really good thread recently on the fact that what we need in every indoor space where households mix, not just necessarily schools, but obviously my focus is the schools, is a multi-layered strategy. We've all seen the Swiss cheese model. We've all seen what Independent Sage and Deep Tea Gudasani put out with what mitigations, a combination of them all. It's not one thing. And what we feel the government has placed on the whole of the UK society is one silver bullet in vaccine, and they've taken everything else away. And even more so in schools, when the fact is they're not vaccinated and they're not offering the vaccine that's approved at the minute. So maybe you could just say a little bit more about having a multi-layered strategy. how that is better than putting all your eggs in one basket, sort of thing.
I mean, vaccines seem to be working great for the adult population, but they are not perfect. I mean, expecting that any one type of mitigation would be perfect when we have multiple mitigations. Like you would want to bet everything on one if you don't have anything else. But if you have other easily affordable mitigation strategies, why would you not take them? That's sort of confusing. And because I mean, like we understand here that it is something in the air, it's something you can inhale. So there is a like multi-layer strategy that is typically employed for indoor environments whenever you are concerned about a indoor air pollutant. So this could be something very simple like particulate matter. It could be something simple like some chemicals. So first thing we try to do is we try to make sure that there is no source of that pollutant. Okay. In this situation, we could it could be thought of in the sense that let's make a rapid testing easily available. So if an infectious person is not in the classroom space, you don't have to bother about them spreading it to others. But the rapid testing may fail at sometimes. It's not going to be 100% applicable always. So let's try to get in other measures as well. We have masks in terms of source control. We have distancing that contributes to dilution. We can have ventilation that again contributes to diluting the air. We can have filtration, which could be the HVAC system filters, or it could be portable air cleaners as well. And so with a multi-layer strategy, you try to make sure that even if one layer fails at some time, you can get over it. You have other layers to rely on. Typically why we do it in indoor air quality management is that most of the time one layer is not enough. I mean, most of the times you can try to sort of make sure that there are no chemicals being used in a space, but there will always be some residual chemicals in the furnitures, furnishings, even the things that are used to clean spaces. So you definitely have to have more layers like dilution, like filtration, to get rid of things that escape the first layer. In this case, we have a similar situation there. We have seen that there are breakthrough infections, even if people are vaccinated. We know that tests can be, you can have false negatives. We know that ventilation systems may not be adequate at times. We know that children are, they are prone to play with their masks. They're not going to wear their mask in a proper manner through the entire school day. So let's assume that multiple of these layers could fail. So that's why we try to stack up these layers and make sure that some of them are going to work. They are going to reduce the risks of infection.
Can I add something to that, please? I mean, I think that it's necessary in any circumstance to have multiple approaches. But one of the things that's going on, and it's still going on now, is there is a sort of inherent assumption of certain performance of certain strategies. And most importantly, in British schools, most schools are built with a ventilation strategy that contains a natural component. I mean, obviously, we spend our whole life going into buildings and looking at the performance of the ventilation strategy. In this country, the most common strategy properties are built with is System 1. It contains natural background ventilation, and that is notoriously inefficient, especially during winter. And in classrooms, you see plenty of classrooms that rely on this. It's that you know that the ventilation rates in those places, okay, when you're looking at it from the perspective of, is there likely to be a build-up of CO2? Is there likely to be a build-up of particulate, of VOC, whether it comes in from outside or originates on the indoor air, or even in the mitigation of viruses, which, as you guys know from my position, diluting and displacing a virus is not the safest strategy. What you should be doing is destroying it instantly at the point of transmission. So from our perspective, multiple strategies is very important, but it's very, very important to make sure that you know what the performance of each strategy, especially when it comes to schools. So, in my view, the vast majority of schools could do with a performance improvement using a strategy that creates a predictable and constant process of dilution at sufficient air changes. You don't need air changes the new air changes post-pandemic, the air changes entering the pandemic are perfectly sufficient to provide adequate ventilation. And if you have a process like photohydronization that kills the virus at transmission, you end up with schools where you never have to waste energy opening windows during the winter, and yet every square centimetre of air is being changed sufficiently so you don't get build-ups of problems and you don't get transmission occurring. So, it's important that to have multiple layers, but the performance of those has to be predictable and measurable, and it has to be managed.
Well, Andrew, welcome back to Safe Ed. It's wonderful to have you here and have your professional input again. Of course, you were on previously discussing all types of mitigation measures from a ventilation and an air scrubbing perspective. You spoke about your photo hydro ionization devices that could be implemented into existing ventilation systems to make a difference. But since you were last on, we've heard from Education Secretary Gavin Williamson that over the course of the next term, CO2 monitors are going to be rolled out. I can't help but think they've had 6 weeks to do this while the schools were shut, but never mind. Now they're going to be coming out into schools apparently. Now, my understanding is that CO2 monitors are all well and good, they're fine, but they're akin to a smoke alarm. They can tell you there's a problem, but they don't do anything to fix it. It can only tell you that if you know how to operate them. Now, could you explain, please, what the relevance of the CO2 readings would be in the classroom in the context of COVID, and how easy to use are these CO2 monitors? Is there any training that you need to use them that teachers would have to have as well?
Well, let me answer that one first. I mean, a CO2 monitor is simply a device. They usually contain a infrared sensor to literally count the molecules, parts per million. And it's a simple thing. It will just give you a digital display telling you what the levels are. So one of the problems with that type of strategy is that you will only know about the problem until the problem's already there. It's not preventative in any way. No. And basically carbon dioxide levels, it actually derives from the commercial space. People use CO2 in offices to determine whether an office has sufficient ventilation, because if the CO2 builds up, people start falling asleep. That's the first sort of symptom of carbon dioxide. Now, in schools, you should be sensing a much wider range of pollutants in the classroom. Okay, if you're just using CO2 as a proxy to determine ventilation, frankly, that's just taking it from the commercial space. What you should be looking at is relative humidity, okay, because that relates to mold and dust mite issues, which can of course cause asthma attacks. You should be looking at particulate count on the air as well, which can cause asthma triggers. NOx pollution coming in from the outside, that can affect breathing, as well as ozone. So CO2 is important, but it's one of a number of things that should be constantly being measured in the classroom right now. And of course, none of these things are actually going to tell you whether the virus is present, but they're all kind of like proxies for, is the environment good for the occupants? So in the schoolroom, you might have young children that have got asthma conditions and other types of sensitivities, and just sensing CO2 isn't necessarily going to help you. If I may give you the example of the tragic case of Ella Kissy Deborah, whose death was ruled as air pollution from particulate. She went to school in a school in London. Lots of roadside pollution. Maybe her tragic circumstances could have been different had they been monitoring the particulate count and looking to manage it. Okay, now there are ways of dealing with that. Actually, when it comes to particulates, in my opinion, filtration is an excellent process for particulate removal. You can consume particulates, it's not going to kill you straight away, although you might have an asthma attack. Filtration is an excellent process for removing that stuff from the air. But the one that we always start with is the dilution ventilation rate. Okay, so if you have a naturally ventilated classroom that's allowing ingress of road traffic pollution, it's quite unlikely that the displacement rate within the classroom with natural ventilation is going to be sufficient, especially during the winter months when people start to shut windows. What you need is something that's creating that dilution displacement for you without having to rely on whether the wind's blowing enough for today and whether it's not cold enough to allow it to be wide open. All those these suggestions, frankly, are just not reliable. We understand that buildings, most buildings are built to this strategy because it's the cheapest method of compliance when people construct buildings in the first place. All right. But the fact is that when you consider how a space is actually being used and all the health and safety considerations go with that, especially in a classroom, you know that ventilation strategy is just not suitable, and you need to improve it, and perhaps improve it in such a way that gives you these air changes without making people freezing cold. That means you've got to have a mechanical process. I mean, remember, we do this day in, day out. I've been doing it for 10 years. We know how to create air changes without causing difficulty, without breaking the bank, without using miles of duct and things like this. Frankly, school classrooms, in my experience, are actually quite easy wins, to achieve those things. That combined with the photohydronization instant kill, you're creating very, very safe environments, and that's obviously what we care about right now.
Asset, as the COVID crisis and brought into, how shall I put this? As it brought into sharp relief a greater issue, a longer standing issue of air quality issues in schools. Andrew's mentioned air pollution from the street. I think you mentioned pollen as well. I was thinking dust as well. These are known allergens, for example. Is the air quality issue in schools been a longer running issue and a greater issue that's been left to just persist for so long? And it's only now that there's something in the air that could potentially kill someone that people are all of a sudden sitting up and taking notice of air quality issues. And does this undermine the government's decision to remove mitigations all the more?
Air quality issues have been a problem for a long time, especially in schools, because of two reasons. One, schools are not very well ventilated, as Andrew mentioned, especially in Europe. You don't have a lot of mechanical ventilation. Reliance is greatly on that there will be some natural ventilation. That's one problem. And the second thing is you have children in there. So children lungs are still developing. So any kind of exposure to any kind of these pollutants is more impactful for them. And there have been long-term losses due to indoor air quality. It's just that COVID is more in your face. So people are paying attention to it, and it's sort of thankful. I am kind of thankful to it for that. It has generated this sustained interest in indoor air quality among the masses, and I hope that keeps on beyond the pandemic. But the thing is, there was an estimate in 2012 that across Europe, every year you lose something like 4 million life years. Disability adjusted life years are lost in Europe every year due to indoor air pollution. And this is not because of indoor air, it's not like people are burning fuels inside. Europeans don't do that mostly. World over, around 4 to 7 million people die every year because of indoor air pollution. There is a big burden there because of solid fuel combustion. But apart from that, there are other reasons also, like the building wasn't designed to be well ventilated. The building was probably made too tight because of energy requirements, and then indoor air quality suffered and health suffered. So this has been a long-lasting issue, particularly I think from the 70s. So 70s, there was a sudden rise in the fuel prices. The OPEC countries decided that they were going to raise the prices, and a consequence of that was people started to make buildings tighter, and the ventilation requirements were suddenly lowered. I mean, there was no good reason to do that. They just thought that, okay, we can lower it. There was no logic behind it. The ventilation rate used to be something like 10 liters per second per person, and then they suddenly lowered it to around 2 to 3 liters per second per person. No logic given, nothing was said why we're doing that, and that led to a gradual emergence of this problem of air quality related issues. And it's, again, to reiterate this, COVID is something more acute and more in your face, but there are a ton of things in indoor air that could potentially kill you, that could potentially damage your health over the long time. Like we did a study in 2019, just before the pandemic, and we're looking at what happens with the bad ventilation. CO2 levels were going to just about 1450 parts per million. That's not very high. Your current limit for schools in England is 1500 parts per million. At CO2 levels of 1450 parts per million, we saw that people's lungs were starting to get affected. So the standard spirometry test that a doctor does for lungs, we did it at the start of the session, we did it at the end of the session. We saw that there is a reduction in their ability to exhale. So that was just 2.5 hours in a ventilation situation where it is 1450 parts per million of CO2, which is not a very high value. And we did it with just CO2 as well. So instead of having low ventilation, we just introduced pure CO2 to show what would happen if, and the ventilation level was high and the CO2 level was just increasing because of pure CO2. That did not affect people. It was a situation when the ventilation was poor, that's what started to affect people. So small times of exposure to bad indoor air quality can affect you in the long run. It's unfortunate that it took a pandemic for people to get alert about it, but let's hope that this kind of interest continues.
Can I just say, from a lay person and someone who obviously is not an expert and have had to learn an awful lot in a very short space of time to try and understand what is necessary and what isn't necessary. As you put it expertly there, that this has been a problem for a long time. Indoor air quality has been a problem for a long time in our schools. And the legacy benefits of fixing it now, I'm sorry that it's taken a pandemic as well to get to this stage. However, the legacy and ongoing benefits for all of us, for all of our children, for the families those children come home to, and for the people who work in those environments, this has got to be fixed. This has got to be done. And it shouldn't be something that's dragged on for a long period of time. It needs to be fixed now. It's an emergency. It needs solutions. It needs not trials, not, thinking, oh, we'll try 10 HEPA filters in a school in Bradford and 10 UV units in a school in Bradford and 10 control schools with nothing, and we'll wait and see in 6 months and then we'll decide on what we should offer. This needs to happen fast. And what I'm, as a parent, really concerned about at the minute is there are a lot of experts, I'm not going to name names, who are advising government panels on what is necessary for improving indoor air quality and making the school situation in particular, because that's my focus, safe. There's an awful lot of talk, there's an awful lot of advice for the last 18 months. There hasn't been any action. There are not sending out industry engineers who do this on a daily basis to all of our schools now in a region and going, right, here's your survey, this is what you need, it's going to cost X pounds, let's get it done. That isn't happening, and that really worries me as a parent. As you've said, this is something that has been going on from the 70s. As from my simple understanding, and for those people out there who are like me and don't get all the technical bits, that as climate change and improvements to insulation developed and evolved, the changes to ventilation didn't evolve at the same rate, and that's partly why we're in this situation now. If they'd both evolved equally, we may not have been with the poor indoor air quality that we have in a lot of indoor settings. But to me, nothing is happening fast enough. Every single day, I have to send my asthmatic child and my eldest son, who's already had COVID very badly in December, I have to send them out to a building that I don't know if the ventilation is adequate. It may be. It's quite a newer school. It's not like their Victorian primary school that's over 100 years old. However, I don't know that. I certainly know that with no other mitigations, that's not a safe environment for them. There's already been 4 cases identified and they've only been back since Tuesday. So I'm, as a parent, I want the talk to stop and the action to start. Yep. Do you think there's any chance of that happening, from your perspective?
Unfortunately, I don't see any of that happening anytime soon. That doesn't seem to be that kind of will amongst the government to make something happen. And as you said, the benefits, long-term benefits are huge. It's not just like health benefits, there are economic benefits. Better indoor air quality leads to better performance. There are like quantifiable benefits, both economic, both like tangible as well as intangible benefits are there. There are quantifications available for these benefits. It's just that people seem to not care at the moment. And I'm sort of slightly militant in this aspect that I don't care how much energy the building consumes. The building's primary goal is not to contribute to energy savings. The building's primary goal is to have healthy occupants. So we don't want to waste energy, but if we are going to need to spend some energy to keep the people healthy, to keep them out of hospitals, let's do it. I mean, there's no point of pursuing this kind of green buildings that are going to make people sick. So we want.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think that there's an assumption that maybe that's part of, if you follow the current guidance, where you're being told to go to 100% fresh air, that's actually, you know, going to throw away a lot of the energy efficiency gains. You know, like we like, as I've said, we do this day in, day out, and our solutions, but provide firstly instant real-time protection against viral emissions indoors without penalising energy efficiency or productivity at all. So I hear what you say, but what you're saying is kind of like assuming that, you know, the only way to deal with the problems of indoor air quality is to increase ventilation rates.
Oh, no, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, like, sometimes people argue that this will cost us money or this will cost us energy. I don't care. I mean, that's not the purpose. The building is not there to save you energy or save you money. We will, no, I mean, as you said, we don't need to input a lot of extra energy to do this. We know how to do it within like absolutely green energy limits, whatever they want to set. It can be done. It's just that people try to put in this argument that, well, this is going to cost us energy, this is going to cost us money. Ultimately, the benefits are going to outweigh all of those concerns many times over.
I'm with you as in that the benefits of improving indoor air quality as a parent and as anybody who has to work in a school on a daily basis would say, I don't care what it costs. You can spend 37 billion on a test and trace system that doesn't work. So let's every single school call up a local engineer, get them out, get a survey done, find out how much it's going to cost, what needs to be done, how long it can be done, and let's get it done. 18 months on, to me, just seems absolutely ridiculous that we're still at this stage now with lots of advice, lots of how to open windows, put a fan, how to build a box fan, how to get HEPA filtration. No action. That's from a parent point of view who agrees with you on everything you've said about the legacy benefits and the fact that it's not happened overnight and these problems have been known about. That's what gets to me. Where's the action? I feel so strongly that there's an awful lot of talk. I mean, I can go on Twitter, I can go on social media, I can go on the news, I can listen to experts discuss and say what needs to happen, but I don't see the action. And that, I suppose, from a parent's point of view, that's my frustration. If I knew there was a problem in my own home right now, I pick up the phone, I get 3 quotes from some engineers who come out and survey, and I get the job done. That's what I find very frustrating when it comes to the health of our children's school staff.
Well, can I give you a story? I live close to Reigate, and there's a children's play centre, and I know the guys won't mind me mentioning it. I hope you don't mind if I say the name of the play centre. It's called Let's Pretend, right there at Nutfield. And that basically, when this was about a year ago, it's obviously a place where parents bring their children. They let them stay there for a while, and obviously they had a similar sort of concern. Now this is a sort of a very similar physical building to a sort of classroom, but it's pure private sector, right? So in those circumstances, what you've just said is a simple process. I mean, I myself, you know, we've installed in a house in a woman who's got very, very severe asthma with her children. That's gone in today. I mean, these are retrofit solutions designed for the entire building. Okay, the one at Let's Pretend was the whole space with the photohydronisation integrated into it. It's, you know, what I call problem solving. You yourself, Sarah, said that's what we do. You know, so the fact is that the solutions are out there. I personally think that putting ventilation air change increases as the primary mitigation is not actually the best way of doing it. if you can use photohydronization. If you detach the COVID mitigation from ventilation, ventilation becomes purely a matter of compliance, and you don't need to increase air changes. As they've done in the pandemic. You can go back to what the air changes were entering the pandemic, which as long as you can achieve those air changes, then you're going to get decent ventilation. The problem is that so many buildings are built with natural ventilation. They can't achieve those air changes during the winter months. And that's why there's a big, healthy retrofit market. As your colleague mentioned here just now, ever since the early 70s, we've been since the wholesale price of energy increased, people started double glazing to save money because of the cost of energy. They started seeing problems of condensation mold. That spawned the entire retrofit market for buildings in this country. And right now, there's about 28 million buildings, okay, that are likely to need retrofits of this nature if we're going to achieve our net zero targets. I mean, these are figures from the all-party parliamentary group for healthy homes and buildings that was in place prior to the pandemic. It's an enormous challenge because so many buildings are built with a strategy, but it has to be done, as you rightly say, and it has to be addressed. You're not going to address this by just opening windows and throwing away energy and so on. It's just not reliable. It doesn't give you a decent enough process. And obviously this is all really about protecting the occupants and making sure that the health of the occupants and the well-being of the occupants is looked after. It's all very, very important. It has to be done in this way.
I think what shocks me, from, like I said, from a parents and a safe ed perspective, is my business. We've just we've rented a new office space, and I have 6 employees in that office space, and the windows don't open, and all I've got is an aircon unit. So I had to go out and I had to educate myself. Well, no, not me, but I had a member of staff go and educate to buy something that's a temporary solution, because we're only in this office for a short while. As an employer, I had to do that. I couldn't decide, oh yeah, I know we need to improve air quality. Tell you what, I'll go and read a few academic papers. I'll discuss it with this academic expert over here. I'll see what they all think. And then maybe in 6 months, 9 months, 18 months, I'll get round to doing something about it. It was either you can't use that space without doing something, or you just can't do that as a private person in business. And what I find shocking is my own government thinks that 18 months on it's acceptable to still be in the same position we were in, back in March 2020 when the schools closed. For everybody, I'm just shocked by it.
You've got the PAS 2035 standard. In there is a strategy called positive input ventilation, which is the one that we use for all of our solutions. I'm personally not familiar with the person who wrote it, but I know a number of people who are, who are part of the ventilation industry. And if you look at the specification for PIV in there, it's actually it contains some information in there. It's just actually shouldn't really be in there. The best strategies or the best installations, I should say. You don't use things like trickle vents and stuff like that with them, because you get a better effect without it. But the fact is that that strategy and how you specify using that strategy, there's very little expertise out there, believe it or not. I mean, our business, all we ever do is retrofits. We problem solve. Someone rings me up. I'm a member of the Radon Council and the UK Radon Association. We solve issues of radon with ventilation methods. Okay, we solve issues of mold condensation, allergies, VOCs. If there's a need to improve the dilution displacement ventilation process within the building, we'll assess that very quickly. We don't need huge reams of paper and hours to deal with it. We can literally do it on site. We carry equipment to measure, and the time it takes to treat a space. To use your example, the one that you've just used there. As soon as you start thinking about commercial spaces, your number of people that occupy the space, what sort of air changes are going to be needed for a commercial space like that, just to know whether what you have in your building is sufficient. It's very likely that you guys might be suffering a bit of poor air quality in that space during winter, unless you open the windows, and then you'll be cold, right? But there is a simple way of giving you the air changes that you require like what we did in the Samaritans here in Reigate, like what we're doing, we've just done today in this lady's house. You know what I mean? But it requires that expertise, and it's not a massive, great specification process at all. But it is the retrofit market. It's not the specification market, and it has to be done right. Now, I've seen numerous examples where these type of systems are installed incorrectly because of poor expertise, and then the strategy gets the blame. The strategy is not at fault; it's the expertise, of installation, or indeed specification, placement of the units, all these things. So it's it's a bit of education, and I personally think that in terms of changing the building code in the future, I'm not sure how realistic that would be. Natural ventilation strategies have their place. Not every single building suffers from poor ventilation. Remember that. You might have a building with natural ventilation that's lived in by one person. Okay, so it would probably suffer if there were 5 people living there, but if it's just one person, it's sufficient. And you never know who's going to occupy a building when you finish building it. You don't know what the future occupancy is going to be. And some of these buildings end up being used as schools. So there's always going to be a need for retrofit improvements to ventilation performance, going forward, right? And the schools in our country, so many buildings didn't start out as school buildings, did they? So many of them used to be homes or used to be other things. So this market, this retrofit market, is where the solution is. And it needs, it's good that PAS 35 is there. It's a great thing it's mentioned, but this is where I think government support and promotion, of this discipline, would be great benefit for the whole country. You know what I mean? Because when you solve
benefit, the expertise is there. People are doing this on a daily basis, and that's their job. So let's just get it done. That I suppose that's my frustration as a parent. Let's get it done. What's so difficult? I should be able to, as a leader of a school, phone up a retrofit engineer, say, can you come out and do a survey next week? Yeah, survey's done. Here's your report. This is what you need. This is what it's going to cost. And that school should be able to go to the local authority or the Department for Education and go, this is what I need to make this.
Well, when you can find 37 billion for test and trace, when you can, let's be polite. No, let's not. Let's call it extortion. Extort 36 billion from working people instead of taxing the wealth. Well, perhaps the wealthy might like to make sure our schools are safe. What do you reckon? Yeah,
it's so true, right? I mean, if the idea of retrofitting, a solution, the net effect, is you're achieving a solution where you don't need to open windows at all in winter, not once, and yet all the ventilation that the building needs is being provided. Not a single length of duct needed either. It's all done, using methods like this. So very simple, quick, easy wins. It's all right there. We have it. We have, we have a very mature market. It just needs to be, pushed.
Well, I said I said at the start of the show that if you thought we'd struggle to fill an hour, you'd be mistaken. We could probably fill 2, because I think we're going to have you back on again, Andrew, because we've still got an awful lot more that we could have covered tonight, and we haven't managed to find time to do it because the show is we are at the end of our time.
Yeah, we never got onto the crucial Welsh ozone ridiculousness, but we'll save that for
we will come back to that for the next show. Yes, the what's happened in Wales is a very interesting story, and is definitely one that Andrew is well placed to explain to us, but sadly it will have to wait for the next time he's on. Thank you very much, Andrew Hobbs, once again for your time. It's been fabulous. Thank you very much, Asit Mishra, for your time tonight. It's been very much appreciated. And thank you very much, Sarah Saul, for being the sole representative of Safe Ed for All tonight. We will see you again on the next